Welcome to the School Mental Health Assist online tutorial series supporting educator mental health literacy. This series has been developed to complement the Ontario Ministry of Education document, Supporting Minds, an educator's guide to promoting students' mental health and well-being. This is the second tutorial in the series and focuses on recognizing and responding to anxiety in the classroom. The first tutorial focuses on creating and sustaining mentally healthy classrooms, which is reflected in Part 1 of Supporting Minds. Over the past 2 years, mental health leaders in Ontario school boards have provided information and support about supporting minds to a range of education professionals in an effort to build knowledge and understanding about mental health at school. Systematic facilitated learning in this complex area of work will continue across Ontario schools in alignment with each board's mental health and addiction strategy. This online tutorial series is meant to complement and reinforce the messages and supports provided through the mental health leaders and other school mental health professionals.
This online tutorial series is offered free of charge through School Mental Health Assist, a provincial implementation support team working alongside the Ontario Ministry of Education to help Ontario's 72 school districts to effectively promote student mental health and well-being. Welcome to the Recognizing and Responding to Anxiety in the Classroom tutorial. You may want to watch the tutorial all at once, or you may prefer to watch it section by section. The choice is yours. Each section will take about 10 minutes to complete. There are also some links, handouts, and videos that you may wish to access as part of your learning. Here is a clickable summary of the contents, which allows you the flexibility to navigate to a specific section. At any time during the tutorial, you can click the Home button at the top right of your screen. This will take you back to the summary page. You can also advance, pause, or go back and forth among slides with your mouse or cursor at your own pace. You may wish to pause, for example, to answer reflection questions that are posed. You'll notice in the bottom right corner of the screen there is a double arrow. You can click on these arrows to make your screen full size. It can be difficult to learn about and discuss mental health problems. Is today a good day for you to engage with this topic? Though the content we will cover is fairly high level and positively oriented, depending on your own life circumstances, the material may be somewhat challenging. You can find support and resources in Section 5 of the Summary of Contents. If you choose to proceed, pace yourself. You can always come back. As you learn about mental health problems that your students may face, you will likely recognize that none of us is immune from experiencing these difficulties. In fact, most of us will be touched by mental health problems in our family, friends, or selves at some point in our lives. Learning the signs of difficulty and how to intervene early to get appropriate help can be part of your own self-care practice. Personal resiliency is a very important skill to practice, to support in others, and to model for your students. Strategies for taking care of your emotional and physical health, like taking time for meals, exercise, sleep, and hobbies, help you to be more resilient in your daily work. And when you model your own self-care, you implicitly teach your students that it matters. You may wish to take a minute to read the handout and to think about the content and the connections to your practice in daily life and in the classroom before proceeding through the tutorial. The Ontario Ministry of Education developed Supporting Minds, a JK-12 resource document, to help educators with their role in creating mentally healthy classrooms and in supporting students who may struggle with their emotions and behavior. You may find this to be a helpful resource day to day. Many educators have told us they refer to it often when trying to support students in their class who appear to be struggling with some sort of emotional problem. You may like to review and/or download the anxiety chapter of this resource if you want more information about recognizing and responding to anxiety problems after completing this tutorial. As an Ontario educator, you probably already do much towards having a mentally healthy classroom. In this tutorial, there will be a focus on recognizing and responding to anxiety in the classroom, and it may provide some new ideas for you to try. In Section 1, the tutorial will highlight an introduction to the concept of anxiety, explore typical responses to stress, and will help us distinguish healthy and unhealthy aspects of anxiety. Common triggers of anxiety include things like taking a test, giving a speech, trying out for a team, interacting with others socially, or participating in class. In these contexts, anxious feelings are not unusual. However, if the anxious feelings start to interfere with a student's functioning, it becomes problematic. Anxiety at school can be prompted by many things, some of which may occur on a daily basis. Take a minute and think about the questions on the screen. What might trigger students to feel anxious at school or in your class? Anxiety is a typical part of growing up. In fact, it is a normal reaction to stress. Everyone has anxious feelings from time to time, but problem anxiety is an exaggerated fear response, which means becoming fearful in a situation that is not dangerous. Most normal anxiety is short-lived. Anxiety may be a problem for students when it, 1, is very intense, 2, persists over longer periods of time, or 3, interferes with their ability to learn, socialize, and participate in activities. In this clip, Patricia Mara Stapleton discusses adaptive and problematic responses to anxiety.
Anxiety, like any mental health disorder, occurs on a continuum. So we see things that get into a mild camp or a moderate problematic camp, and then there's the severe camp. So naturally, there's some things in school, and a good deal about school and learning things that you don't know a lot about cause us to be nervous, and that's normal. And we want students to understand that that's the normal part of growing up. It's normal for them, and it's normal for us as educators and as mental health support people supporting their learning. So it's normal to be nervous about speaking in class, or sometimes we ask students to read aloud in class or answer a question in front of the whole class. It's normal to be anxious about those things or a little bit nervous. Where we get into sort of the moderate range is where we start to see a little bit of avoidance, where whenever we have to read out loud, we're going to the bathroom or we're sharpening a pencil. So we're trying to avoid those things rather than work through them and get beyond them on the other side. Things that are in the severe area in terms of anxiety are where the anxious symptomatology gets in the way of someone's emotional, daily functioning, academic achievement, that kind of thing, gets in the way of social functioning with other children, with other classmates. And when we see those kinds of functional impairments happening, we know that something is really problematic and might need some more attention or intervention.
Look at the prevalence statistics on this slide. You may encounter several students in your class who suffer from anxiety. Most of these students will not tell others about their anxious feelings and will not ask for help. Understanding more about anxiety and what it looks like will better equip you as an educator to recognize and address the needs of students who are feeling anxious. When problems become persistent and debilitating, a student may be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. It is important to note that diagnosis is governed by the Regulated Health Professions Act and can only be made by a psychologist, psychological associates, physicians, or psychiatrists. Anxiety can appear in many forms, and critical terms used by regulated health professionals may include those listed. These are described further in Supporting Minds. Learning in this section reminded us of the importance of student mental health and well-being at school and introduced the concept of anxiety, typical responses to stress, and how to distinguish healthy and unhealthy aspects of anxiety. Take a minute to think about any new learning that you've taken away from this section. Jot your ideas down and save them so that you can reflect on your thoughts at the end of this tutorial. In Section 2, we'll be learning about the physical, social, emotional, and cognitive signs of anxiety, and we'll suggest ways for recognizing indicators of anxiety in students.
At times, anxiety is manifested through physical symptoms. What happens when we feel anxious? Where do we feel the anxiety in our bodies? We may experience an increased heart rate or rapid breathing. We might begin to sweat or feel lightheaded and dizzy. We might feel nauseous, experience stomach discomfort, or sense numbness and tingling. We could even feel a tight pain in our chest or have choking sensations. It's important to know that anxiety is not dangerous. Although it feels uncomfortable, it is not harmful. The sensations we feel are there to protect us from danger, not hurt us. Also, anxiety doesn't last forever, but while we're anxious, it feels like it might. However, these feelings are temporary and will eventually decrease.
Signs and symptoms of anxiety can be like thinking about an iceberg. Only a small fraction of the iceberg is above the waterline. Like an iceberg, some signs of anxiety are obvious. They're what you see in the classroom. You may also need to know what is below the surface in order to understand and support the student. Many of the indicators are less apparent, appearing below the surface. If you pause on this slide, you'll be able to examine the signs and symptoms that are more obvious above the waterline, and those that are less obvious belong below the waterline. You may wish to hear more about signs and symptoms above and below the waterline. If you do, click your mouse or cursor on the link. Children and youth with anxiety may also present with other related issues, such as the ones listed here. Think about what you've learned so far about signs and symptoms of anxiety and the iceberg analogy. Now think about the students you teach. Do you see a student with any signs of anxiety? What appears above the iceberg? What do you think might be going on below the waterline for that student? Anxiety is a normal human reaction, and we all feel anxious from time to time, but sometimes aspects of the classroom and school can trigger anxious feelings in vulnerable students, which can impact their development and well-being. It is helpful to know when to be concerned about what you may be seeing. When anxiety causes problems with functioning at home or school, there are 4 areas that need to be considered: disproportion, duration, distress, and disruption. If students are exhibiting signs that are out of proportion, long-lasting, causing distress, and interfering with functioning, then there is reason for concern. Some of the signs of problem anxiety that you might observe are pervasive, and some are specific to either elementary or secondary school students. When you notice signs and symptoms of anxiety that are of such intensity and duration that they warrant a response, it is important that you seek the support of the mental health professionals in your school board or community. Professional support is important because the earlier we intervene, the sooner we can help. Early intervention can teach lifelong skills for managing anxiety. There is effective treatment for anxiety disorders, and treatment can consist of medication and/or therapy with the child or youth and/or family. Learning in this section clarified that anxiety can be difficult to recognize, that indicators can be both obvious and less apparent, and that by recognizing the symptoms of anxiety, we can know when to provide support or when help is needed from a mental health professional. Take a minute to think about any new learning that you've taken away from this section. Jot your ideas down and save them so that you can reflect on your thoughts at the end of this tutorial. On the screen, you'll see the goals for Section 3. In the process of thinking about these goals and the content of this tutorial, you are encouraged to think about the conditions and strategies that may also increase your own ability to reduce anxious feelings. Evidence shows that when we model how we nurture and care for ourselves, that we teach our students how to do the same. In other words, they learn from what they see us doing. Learning for All uses a triangle to show a multi-tiered system of support for learning in Ontario. As noted in the Mentally Healthy Classroom module, a similar triangle can be applied to mental health support. At Tier 1, universal supports that promote mental health involve all students and educators and have an impact on the whole school environment. These supports include strategies for creating a welcoming and inclusive setting for learning and fostering meaningful student and family connection to school. Educators are well positioned to provide these as part of the everyday classroom and school experience. And as a province, Ontario has been working for many years to create accepting, inclusive, and safe school climates. Tier 2 strategies can be used in the classroom to support students who may be more at risk for mental health problems. Sometimes it is helpful to engage the help of other professionals with more specialized experience to provide consultation and support with these students. Tier 3 supports are for students who are experiencing significant distress and require the involvement of mental health professionals in the school board and/or community. Quite often, students with this level of need can be successful in the regular classroom setting with appropriate and consistent support. Specifically in relation to student anxiety, universal strategies help to normalize anxious feelings, reduce potential sources of stress at school, promote positive mental health, and destigmatize mental illness. Drawing on the AIM model introduced in the Mentally Healthy Classroom module, these are strategies that can be used at Tier 1 in the regular classroom to create calm and welcoming classroom environments that help all students to manage feelings of anxiety and worry. At Tier 2, educators can use techniques that help students who are prone to anxiety to feel safe and to take needed risks in the classroom setting. Being able to support students who need or are receiving Tier 3 support from mental health professionals is also important so that school can be a safe place for these students when they are feeling vulnerable. More specifically at Tier 1, when educators greet students by name each day, provide a safe, welcoming environment with predictable routines and structures, help students to manage time and chunk assignments, and create a learning space that facilitates risk-taking and participation, they are helping all students to manage occasional feelings of anxiety. In addition, and because sometimes learning is difficult in busy classroom life, it can be helpful for all students to explicitly learn how to stop and take a breath to improve their focus and energy level. There are many ways to inspire a calm classroom environment and to teach skills for relaxation. For example, you will remember that in the Mentally Healthy Classroom module, mindful contemplation was introduced as a way to focus student attention and awareness. Focused stretching, progressive muscle relaxation, and deep breathing exercises are other ways to help students to take a breath to help them to be ready for learning. The Anxiety Info Sheet from SMH Assist contains a number of strategies to consider to help educators to welcome, include, promote, understand, and partner in the interest of helping all students to manage feelings of anxiety. You may want to print a copy for later reference. All students benefit from a calm, welcoming, and predictable classroom environment, and the strategies that we have presented for the whole class are certainly helpful for students who are prone to problems with anxiety. But these students sometimes also require a higher dose of these strategies to be successful at school. For example, by creating a learning environment in which students feel welcome to speak up and socialize, it helps the anxious student develop and use help-seeking skills. This can be further enhanced by pairing students who are anxious with students who are open and welcoming. Similarly, students who are anxious may have difficulty interacting with others and knowing how to effectively solve problems. Explicitly teaching problem-solving skills as part of what happens regularly in the classroom will help to normalize this instruction for all students, but particularly for those students who need it. In addition, when educators build relationships and take the time to develop rapport and trust with students, all students benefit from this connection, and those who are prone to problems with anxiety do much better. Further, anxious students feel safer and more supported to take healthy risks at school when educators maintain a calm, patient tone of voice in interactions and help students to break difficult tasks into smaller, manageable steps. Note that for some students, even when they have otherwise healthy levels of anxiety, writing tests and exams or public speaking can be overwhelming and incapacitating. These students may require accommodations, such as additional time if needed, opportunity to write in a quiet place, and encouragement to gradually face the feared situation. For example, doing a speech in front of 3 to 4 students instead of the whole class. You may wish to refer to the Anxiety Info Sheet or Supporting Minds for more ideas. In this video clip, Jennifer Kalari, a social worker, describes what students experience when they feel anxious and a strategy that teachers can use to calm them down.
Well, I think
what they should know really would apply to all of the age groups. I mean, anxiety is real, and it's an incredibly uncomfortable, distressing emotion when it's to the point that it's blocking someone from being able to participate in their life. The best way that I can explain it is, imagine that you're hanging on a balcony and you're going to fall, like you're literally holding on. And someone's got your hand and you're screaming because you're scared. And someone's going, now, you need to relax. You need to calm down. You need to talk to me nicely. Let's take a breath. All of those things that we tend to do when someone is incredibly anxious often causes the person to escalate because they're hanging in their mind from a balcony, and you're trying to talk them in a way that's incredibly rational, and you'll often see an escalation. So the most important thing is to really listen and hear them and echo back the urgency of what they're saying, not in a way that you become afraid too. Like, oh no, not a test, you hate tests. That will certainly make them think, oh my gosh, it's worse than I thought. But you want to really understand, like, you're really scared. This is a very frightening thing for you and you're worried. So you really sort of get into their, you set yourself to their emotional channel a little bit and listen first. And that's really the most important way to get a child to calm down and start to feel that they're being heard.
As noted, reducing stress through deep breathing is a technique that educators and students can use on a regular basis. You may wish to pause the module and take 5 minutes to try this technique yourself. How might you use this technique with your whole class? What impact might deep breathing techniques have for the anxious student? Additional information can be found at the Psychology Foundation of Canada with the link on the screen. Learning in this section covered the concepts that you see on the screen. There are many universal classroom strategies which will help manage anxiety within the classroom. Which ones might you consider using to reduce anxious feelings for all students? Which ones might you apply when students are at risk for problem anxiety? As you've worked through the section of the module, you may have thought about the conditions and strategies that you use to reduce anxiety. There are 4 learning goals for Section 4. To become familiar with and develop a repertoire of strategies to support students with problem anxiety, to help students develop voice around self-advocacy, and to become familiar with your board's referral process. In this section, we talk about the Tier 2 and Tier 3 support strategies that are appropriate for the classroom. Meet Rochelle. She is a grade 12 student diagnosed with anxiety. She has had symptoms of anxiety since she was in grade 2, experiencing severe panic attacks and generalized anxiety. She describes her panic attacks as debilitating and talks about times when they caused her to completely shut down, be unavailable for learning, or even be in a state of persistent shivering. Sometimes she avoided participating in school. Many of her symptoms stemmed from worry. The relationship that you have with your students is one of the most potent enablers of student well-being. What might seem like small or even inconsequential things can actually be very important for a student struggling with anxiety. In this clip, Rochelle tells us what teachers did for her, what she found to be supportive. But before you listen to what she has to say, have a look at the anxiety processing chart and consider the types of strategies you think might be appropriate for a student with symptoms like Rochelle's.
Actually, my calculus teacher was really good about it too, because I remember one day on a test I just broke down and I couldn't write anything, and she was just like, okay, no problem. Would it make you feel better if I spoke to you about the test and you told me the answers back? And I was like, you would do that for me? And she was like, yeah. And I remember that the next time there was a test, she dragged me out of class, even though I felt ready because I'd been studying for it for the last 3 days. And she just asked me, do you feel okay to write today? And you know what? It's the little things like that that are just like, thank you. Thank you for making sure that I'm okay.
Now that you have heard what was important to this student, reflect on the strategies you selected from the processing chart. Would you change anything? You may also be interested in seeing Rochelle's self-advocacy card. If the student has been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, there will often be assessments available in the OSR, which will provide important information for you. Collaboration between home, school, and mental health professionals, if they are currently involved, ensures that priorities for intervention are identified and both short-term and long-term goals are identified. If you recall the messages provided to us by Rochelle, you'll remember that connecting with the student, acknowledging their concerns and taking them seriously, providing reassurance and support for the student can be very reassuring to them. It is often helpful to try to understand the reason of what appears to be oppositional or defiant behavior. Thinking about the iceberg and being curious about the reason underneath the behavior rather than just what you see outwardly can help to better understand what you may be seeing in the classroom. Realistic expectations for managing specific anxiety, test anxiety, social anxiety, are critical for students with more problematic anxiety. Educators should develop realistic priorities collaboratively, including the student if able, provide accommodations for learning, and engage the appropriate teachers. Setting priorities for well-being and adjustment at school, not just getting the work done, serve to reduce anxiety and promote optimism about the student's ability to manage the anxiety both in the short term and the long term. The Anxiety Information Sheet provides ideas for supporting students with specific types of anxiety problems. Do you know who demonstrates any of these concerns? How could you use these strategies? In this media clip, Dr. Katerina Manasas discusses specific strategies for students identified with an anxiety disorder. She shares her expertise for the primary grades through to high school. As you listen to Dr. Manasas, you may want to make note of the points that resonate with you.
Anxiety can impact students in every aspect of their school life. It can make it difficult to attend school, particularly with separation anxiety, but some of the others as well. It can make it difficult to participate in class. If you can imagine putting up your hand to answer a question, that's risking embarrassment every single time. So for socially anxious kids, that's really difficult. Presentations are terrible for them as well. Working in groups can be difficult for kids who have, again, anxiety about how their peers are going to respond to them. And test taking can be terrible for kids who worry. They can freeze up on tests, or they can become overwhelmed with assignments that are a little bit bigger. So any of those are really common manifestations of anxiety in school-age children. I think starting with the primary, I think it's important to remember that children don't always recognize that they're anxious and don't always say it. So in that age group, it's important to realize that the child who freezes up or bursts into tears or has a tantrum in certain situations and is otherwise, not so badly behaved, may actually be experiencing anxiety in that situation. And then there's a lot of specific ones for kids who, for example, have difficulty with large assignments, breaking them into chunks with positive reinforcement for doing every chunk. There's perfectionistic kids where you want to give them lots of check marks and maybe not emphasize X's so much. There's all kinds of little strategies that you can use depending on where the child is most anxious, some of which are referred to in a little table that I've shared with you. In terms of what's helpful at the intermediate levels, it's important to think also that the child doesn't want to necessarily be singled out for their anxiety. So what can be done to reduce everyone's anxiety is going to be a good thing. If you can do some brief relaxation, for example, with the whole class, that can be helpful. Having a more organized or predictable classroom routine can be helpful. Having lots of advance notice for tests and assignments can be helpful. And all of these things reduce everyone's anxiety without necessarily singling out the child.
An essential part of intervention and management is being able to identify the specific concerns and to include the student as well as his/her parent guardian in developing a support plan. By normalizing fears and recognizing that everyone has concerns and worries, we lessen the stigma that can be associated with anxiety. With reassurance, structure, and safety, students can begin to use the coping strategies identified in their support plan. Encourage them to take small steps towards their goals. Reinforce their coping strategies, for example, breathing, visualizing, counting, self-talk, relaxation, and help set them up for success by providing flexibility and adjusting work expectations. Evaluation, small chunks, provide interim deadlines, discourage perfectionism as needed. Help them be available for learning in the classroom by reducing the anxiety they feel, by providing consistency in expectations and routines, and by not singling the student out for attention in class. Develop signals with the student to let them know in advance when they may be called upon. Provide them with opportunities to build their confidence and to build on success. Sometimes, when a student is struggling with anxiety, educators need to provide extra accommodations and supports to help them to be successful. At other times, the student might require classroom support and professional mental health treatment. Knowing the pathways to, from, and through care in your school board is important. When you are concerned about a student's mental health, who do you call first? What is the pathway to service for students in your school? Learning in this section was meant to cover the concepts that you can see on the screen. Some students will require targeted approaches, and a repertoire of strategies may be required to support them with anxiety. It is important to collaborate with mental health professionals, sometimes community agencies, and your board has a referral process that you should be familiar with to best support students with anxiety. As you've worked through this module, you may have thought about the strategies that you can use to reduce your anxiety. Mental health is a key foundation of school success. Students with good mental health, who are socially connected and resilient, have a better chance of reaching their potential. Thank you for taking the time to learn with us in this online tutorial series from School Mental Health Assist. Feel free to contact us for more information. Need help now? You can find support and resources at these websites on the screen.